This is TWiT.
Stacey Higginbotham has a story for us. Go ahead, Stacey.
Okay, so I'm really excited because this morning the EU issued its proposal for legislation around AI and AI apps. No, Jeff, this is actually really good legislation. You read it, so but you don't think this is good?
I was impressed. I thought it was good. As we know, Jeff doesn't like any regulation of technology.
No, that's not true. I don't.
I'm going to let Jeff talk
you
in
explain
a minute.
it first. Okay. You explain it first, yes.
I'm going to tell you what they're going to do or what they want to do. They're basically trying to classify the outcomes of your AI algorithm on what it is intended or what your AI is intending to do and on the outcomes. So the risk levels are unacceptable for, like, they talk about things like coercion of minors and things like that. They also have the high risk areas, and this is where things like biometrics, that would be DNA scans, facial recognition, and iris scans all fall into high risk. And in the high risk category, what they're asking for companies to do is basically document their process of like how their algorithm was built, annotated the data that goes into it, and then to actually test it when, tested it, I guess, in a lab function to see what the implications are, and then to come back and continue to do that. So to me, I look at that and I think, okay, that makes sense. It's fundamentally changing the way the software industry has worked, which is like, hey, let's throw some beta out there and see what happens. But I think the EU is trying to make a distinction in areas where it's not just a cool feature for like your email provider, but this is like, I'm setting bail for someone or a real life and death, life-changing kind of thing. They're like, hey, let's have you show your work and test it out a little bit before you release it to the public.
I think that's
my take. Go,
very
Jeff.
sensible. But Jeff, what's wrong with that?
Well, and I think as it stands, Stacey, you're right. This is not bad, but I can see danger at every bullet in the list here. So I said this the other week on the show. I think that the biggest mistake the technology industry made in the last couple of decades was naming it artificial intelligence, because those became scare words, right? And even algorithm is a scare word. Data is a scare word now.
Well, math
much
is a
of this
scare
stuff
word.
Is done now. So what is
math?
I didn't hear
math.
Oh, math. Yes. Well, that's true.
Sorry,
true.
Jeff.
Or as they say in the England, maths. Which I never got. Why is it plural, maths?
Well, it's funny is maths is plural, but
so,
sport is singular.
No, we're not going to go there.
Okay.
I know.
Keep going, Jeff.
We'll never get back.
Take us down your slippery slope, man.
That's called link bait.
Where
you got me, right by the, you got me right there. Yeah, like a hook in the fish in the mouth. It's like,
this is a Seinfeld moment.
Yeah.
Why is it now?
Why is sports plural, but math singular? But look, okay, I'm going to go through these bullet points, and you can tell me what's
hospital. Wrong. Why is it in hospital? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So for example,
Jeff, to make his point,
how do people create credit scores now? Right? There are algorithms now. When you go to the bank, they have formulae based on their experience that say people who do this are good credit risk, people who do that are bad credit risk. They've always done that. And they did it, with Scriveners and pens long ago. And then they did it more and more with formulae.
And they do the same thing with insurance.
Now there's some wall that says, it's artificial intelligence.
Right.
Well, now it's an evil thing.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think any algorithm.
This isn't saying it's evil.
It's any algorithm can be conflated with AI, and they're not the same thing. But I want to go through these bullet points because I agree with you, Stacey. This doesn't seem like a bridge too far. For instance, a ban on AI for indiscriminate surveillance, including systems that directly track individuals in physical environments.
Please go to the actual law.
Okay, so this is the problem is the law has been leaked. It's a proposal that's circulating online. Is the draft out?
The proposal, here. Where do you want me to drop this?
Just tell me where to find it, because I'm reading the Verge article, but it was from a couple of days ago. So they
go to the ec.europa.eu.
Okay.
And if you go to the Commission's press page,
Europe Fit for the Digital Age, Commission proposes new rules and actions for excellence and trust in artificial intelligence. And I agree.
You can scroll down to like where they start classifying.
Here it is. High risk. Critical infrastructures that could put the life and health of citizens at risk. I think this must be self-driving vehicles, things like that, right? Educational or vocational training that may determine access to education. AI systems should not be used in ... critical infrastructures, educational or vocational training.
They're not saying they shouldn't be used in. They're saying that if they're in these categories, you have to follow rules about basically explaining. It's basically showing your work and then auditing your work.
And here are the obligations. Adequate risk assessment and mitigation systems, high quality of the data sets. In other words, not just a bunch of white people for face recognition, logging of activity to ensure traceability of results. This seems fair. Detailed documentation, providing all information necessary on the system and its purpose for authorities to assess its compliance. Clear and adequate information to the user. Yes. Appropriate human oversight measures to minimize risk. CF RoboCop, and a high level of robustness, security, and accuracy.
So if you look at, Jeff, like your credit card scoring, your FICO score, this is actually really, I think this is useful because it gives transparency to how those things are assessed.
How did you calculate this? Not that you can't calculate it, but how did you get to this? And
like,
I think that's fair.
Like we saw this with Stanford actually in their COVID vaccine algorithm or flowchart, however you want to call it, when they decided who got the vaccine, and then suddenly they were like, "Oh, this prioritized older people who were not on the front lines," and Stanford published it, and then everyone said, "Oh, here's your issue." Yeah. Like that's the process that we want these things to go through, and this law says these following classes will have to do this. So you can't just shrug it off. It's basically doing what Stanford did. And companies don't want this because they don't want that transparency. Some of them may feel it's competitive advantage. And it does change the way that we release products and will slow things down somewhat.
I think it's also good.
Well, actually, some of the big companies may be in favor of it because they can afford to do this, whereas startups can't.
Right. They do distinguish
but I don't think you should be a startup if you're going to put out an AI algorithm that like tracks someone's bail and says, I think you are morally responsible. You have to be responsible for those actions. I don't think that's a problem. We want to know
how they calculate that. I agree with you 100%.
It's like you have to have a license to be a lawyer or a doctor. Right. I'm not saying all licensing is good. Braiding hair seems a bit excessive, but
I think quite importantly, they make the distinction between uses of AI with limited risk and minimal risk. They say, for instance, the proposal allows the free uses of applications such as AI-enabled video games or spam filters. The vast majority of AI systems fall into this category, and the draft regulation does not intervene here. So they do at least say, well, this is uses of AI that are de minimis, and these are the ones that might be more significant. And I think that's
right. But I guess part of my question is, why is it just AI then?
It should be algorithms, but this is algorithms, right? This is algorithms, and that's really, I think they say AI because AI is understood and well known and all that, but they really should just say computer algorithms because that's what. Well,
and they define that they talk about AI systems, they talk about apps. I think they talk about the definition somewhere in here, but I can't remember. But ideally,
this stuff is not clearly AI. For instance, they say biometric identification systems. That's not AI.
They're basically saying when you put a computer in charge of making a decision about a person or a thing,
that's right.
Here are the cases where we probably need a little more oversight.
Right. Yeah. I think this is completely appropriate, to be honest with you.
And at this level, I won't disagree, but the funny thing is I fear.
I understand. I completely agree. Yeah.
I fear them going over, and I've seen how European regulation has worked out to date, and it's pretty crappy.
Well, like that cookie thing.
Netstate is an awful law, because it's out of fear.
So, but Jeff, you would, I think, agree that it is prudent and reasonable to consider AI and its use and to put some limits on it, or at least some requirements on it, right?
I tend to think that if you want to regulate surgery, you regulate surgery. And whether it's AI or not doesn't really matter. It's how you regulate that activity.
So don't call it AI. Call it computer decision making. Either way.
Well, even why is it computer decision making? Humans make a lot of bad decisions too.
Yeah, but it's a little harder to investigate their algorithm.
Yeah, you can ask them, like, if you know that's why people hate bureaucracies, but you can go to a person and say, stop doing that, right? You have the chance to say, let me talk to your manager. When you go to Facebook because you disagree with their algorithm or you find it harms people, you're stuck in this. And there was actually a really good article about getting stuck in the Facebook bureaucracy where they've I don't know if it's intentional or not. They've built systems that when you're badly affected by it, there's nowhere to go. There's no way to really address it unless you can get media attention and then people call in.
Right. So I'll say regulate the companies for any behavior, not just AI. Then whatever behavior you find difficult and dangerous, whatever the cause of it.
Okay, that's fine. Of course, that's fine.
You need to regulate at a technology level here because it's not, if you regulate by the company's individual deployment of something, it's too one-off. You need to, and these are broad general rules over a big class.
But every company will have their own algorithms, and they'll all be different. They'll all be proprietary.
I know, but we can see them. That's the beauty. When you go to Facebook and you say, hey, our presidential election is all screwed up and we have anti-vaxxers everywhere. We would like to understand why this is happening. Facebook can say, here's the process by which we're feeding information to people. And here's why it's doing that. In companies, just so you know, Jeff, companies already have, there's a field called ML ops. They already have the things in place to document their data science, like how they built the algorithm. They document their data sets. That's already in existence at any company building this, because if their data scientist keels over, they need to be able to say, oh, well, they're gone. Now we have to do this ourselves, right? So it's not a new burden for anybody who's doing data science at any level. It's the audit and the accountability.
2 weeks ago
go ahead, Ant.
2 weeks ago on This Week in Enterprise Tech, Miss Triveni Gandhi, I believe was her name. She was pretty much talking about all of this. She's a senior data scientist, I believe, for DataQ, and they talk all about this ML ops and all of the issues with ethics behind it. And I believe we even got into a discussion about looking at it the way Asimov had the robotics law. Was it?
Yeah. That's widely considered to be bogus, but okay. The laws of robotics make no sense.
Laws of robotics.
Yeah, they're not even internally consistent, but that's fine.
My only other point, Stacey, is, and this will go to your favorite thing from me, is what leads to a fear regime that leads to moral panic. Let me give you an example from the U.S. Representative Tom Malinowski, who is my representative in New Jersey, who I think is great, and I've supported him, full disclosure, and given him money, and when we could knock on doors, I knocked on doors from him. He's come up with probably the best effort to slice off 230. I still think it's bad. I still think there's a lot of problems with it, and I attended a session with him and then talked to a few people on Capitol Hill about this. One of my biggest complaints is the nickname of the bill, the Dangerous Algorithms Bill, right? And so when we start separating out artificial intelligence and dangerous algorithms, we have a larger impact on the adoption of technology and the use and some of the stupid regulation that can then follow. So I'm always sensitive to that and how it's positioned. That's part of my problem here. So that this is about artificial intelligence. If we'd never named it artificial intelligence, I don't know that this law would exist. There might have been something else. You're right. You had an ML ops operation. There were other things to know. But by putting it up in that kind of labeling, it often leads to problems.
I am talking, okay. I'm just going to go with, I think you agree with me and you're mad at the fact that it uses AI.
No, I worry about how they'll F this up because I saw how they F'd up privacy in a lot of ways, not as bad as other areas.
GDPR is actually not a terrible... GDPR in the EU is actually a decent law. I mean,
GDPR is an okay law, but it has problems. It has some wackiness in there.
Every law has problems,
PII.
Jeff. I mean,
there is no such thing as perfection. We're making attempting to make progress towards perfection. And I think you got to take a step. You can't take no steps saying, well, we can't get it right. Let's not do anything.
But you also need a voice of caution about this, which I am.
I'm glad you are. And you're absolutely right. And sure, they have screwed things up sometimes.
As you say, Stacey, we have to have a conversation about it. And this is that conversation.
Yeah.
What could go wrong with Fury and everything that go wrong is a conversation to have.
Well, and one thing I note in the, at least and this isn't the law, but the proposal is that they don't actually define AI. They talk about the benefits of AI.
Yeah, they don't have a definition here.
They need a definition. And I think that's part of that is actually a problem because
that's
what are you regulating?
What's the line?
But computer algorithms that impact human behavior should probably be regulated to some degree, at the very least requiring transparency that's kind of minimum.
So what the Malinowski bill does.
They have.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say they kind of have divided this up into they call it the machinery products, which is like the hardware,
right?
And then the AI is basically pretty much the software side is really kind of what it looks like they're doing here. And they have new machinery regulation, so they're using. I mean, could they say software? Sure, but you know how politicians.
Well, and that kind of supports a little bit Jeff's argument because until you say what you're regulating in a way that's clear,
better said than I did.
Yeah, yes. then I think maybe you need to go back to the table and say, well, what exactly are you regulating here? And if you replaced AI with algorithms, computer algorithms, I'd be comfortable with what they're proposing here. You can't say it's AI that TikTok uses or Facebook uses to cultivate the news feed or TikTok uses to put on, the front page. That's not AI. That's an algorithm. But I think even that should be transparent. I think it totally
the Malinowski bill says basically algorithms are bad, but if you do things in chronological order, that's okay. Well, that can get gamed as bad as anything.
That's not true. Yeah. Algorithms aren't per se bad, but it should be transparent. Because if the algorithm says no fat people on the front page, you would want to know that.
But the issue isn't what you want to know is the impact of it. Whoever made that algorithm, whatever data made algorithm, they may not know it. It's more about studying.
That's what this is calling for. This is saying when you put out an algorithm, you have to, before you put out the algorithm, you have to assess how it will affect people.
Yes.
You may not know until it's out.
Well, do your best.
And then you need check.
Well, you have to do it. And then there's, presumably, this is what the appropriate human oversight offers, is saying that oversight will be used to, it says, measure to minimize risk. So that's saying, hey, when we see that this algorithm is causing, harm, we can go back and say, yo, this is happening, fix it.